Hello, everybody. This is Zach's at it again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and it is an honor to be here with author and comedian Michael Long. Michael was the assistant writer, if you will, for the posthumous release, autobiographical release of Mr. James Gregory, the funniest man in America, who left us back in May of 2024. He was a personal friend of mine, and I was his biggest fan, and I'm honored to be talking with you today, Michael. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, anytime somebody wants to talk about James, I am happy to do it.
Well, thank you for giving us this treasure, which is basically his parting gift to us. It was such a well-crafted book. I had the privilege of interviewing James twice, and I used to tell him, you should really write a book. Both times I interviewed him, I said, you should really write a book. And he said, I'll get to it. I'll get around to it one of these days, and if I do, it won't be funny. It'll be about my life experiences. And I said, well, I think that'd be great. And I said, you've got somebody here that'll do your services for free. And even though he didn't use me, I won't hold that against him, because you and he did a beautiful job in collaborating for this.
You're so kind. Coming from a fellow writer, I appreciate the kind words. But I got to tell you, you know what I'm about to say. All I did was get out of the way. All I did was try not to mess up what came out of his mouth.
Right.
Because he speaks in whole paragraphs, and all you got to do is write it down or record it and hang on.
Right.
And so this is what you're reading in there is not me. All I did was cross the T's and dot the I's and maybe put a little order to it. This is how James sounds if you're sitting across his table in his house talking to him. That's what this book is.
And I say that he was a personal friend of mine. He made me feel that way, whether I really was or not, and when he called me for that last interview, he called me directly from his phone number. So until he died, I had James Gregory's phone number in my phone, and just that little thing just meant so much to me.
Well, he would want you, and you know this better than I do. I'm sure you know him better than I do. Just all the time you spent with him, and he would want you to say that. He would say, "Of course he's my friend. What else would it be?" And then he'd laugh. That'd be exactly what he'd do.
Well, I know when I mentioned it, and he said, "And you can tell people that even though we're friends, you still won't co-sign." That's what he said to me. I was just a fan who had the pleasure of meeting him after the show, like everybody else, before the pandemic hit. And then I wrote to his agent and said, I write for the local paper here, and I would just like to interview him. And, as I do with all kinds of celebrities that I'd like to interview, nobody usually gets back to me, but he did. And boy, do I treasure those interviews.
Well, he was a man that really genuinely loved and respected, and that word is important, loved and respected everybody. Mm-hmm. He never took anybody's admiration for granted, and he saw, as you see in the book, he never, ever talked about, they're my fans. They're my fans. You'd never catch him saying that, because he never did. Mm-hmm. He would say, they're my friends, they're my customers, and whatever he was doing, I don't believe anybody can produce a moment where James walked up to him and said, or they walked up to James and he said, not now. That just wasn't in it.
Right.
He could be in Cracker Barrel with his family. Mm-hmm. And you'd walk up to that big round table. I always have one big round table in the Cracker Barrel for you. You got 7 or 8 people or more, and he would stop right then. He wouldn't say, "Oh, come back when were finished. No, he'd stop right then. The whole family would join in. You'd meet his brother and whoever else was with him that day.
Right.
He genuinely loved people. He loved what he did. And what a funny man he was. Because those stories they all start with a big dollop of experience and truth. These were, what I love about him so much is that if you come from the part of the world you and I come from,
right,
there is, these people firsthand. You got your own aunt and uncle. You got all these people that talk like that have these experiences, and this is the great secret of, I think, of James Gregory, is if you go over to the West Coast or the North, or parts of Europe, other parts of the world, they have the same experiences too. The accent might be a little different, or some of the details might vary, but these are human stories about family and friendship, and just how it is to live in this world. He understood at a fundamental level how this works to be alive.
And how did you get to be the lucky one that he chose to have your name under his when he published this wonderful book?
Well, when I mentioned I'd been to Nashville, I went to school at Murray State over in Western Kentucky. Maybe some of your listeners know Murray State. And after that, I went to graduate school down in Nashville at Vanderbilt. And the reason I went down there to Vanderbilt is not because it's a famous, wonderful school. I went down there because there was a comedy club down there, and it was 1985. I wanted to be a comedian. So I went down there to study, but mostly I went down there to do stand-up comedy. And while I was doing comedy, I met, of course, you know, and your listeners may know, this club is called Zanies in Nashville. It was a very famous, very early club, and it was run by a man named Lenny Sisselman.
Another wonderful guy, by the way.
Another wonderful guy, one of the important people in the comedy world too. If you are a road comedian and you don't know Lenny Sisselman, you're not a road comedian.
Right.
But anyway, that's the way it was. And so I met Lenny in those days while I was doing stand-up, and I met James. And, of course, James was already really rising fast in those days. So that's how I met him. And then comedy, I didn't pursue comedy. So I pursued it for several years, and then I went on. Now I'm a writer here in Washington, D.C. area. So I moved to Washington, but I stayed in touch with people in comedy. Some of my best friends are still comedians, and, of course, Lenny I'd stay in touch with. And a few years ago, it hadn't been too many years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I guess, we hadn't talked in a while, and I don't remember why we called. One called the other about some matter that the other knew something about. And we were just catching up, and I mentioned some of these books that I had written with other people, or even for other people. And he said, well, James really needs to know, really wants to do this. He said, would this fit with what you're doing? And I said, I would be honored to do it. And so we had a little call, talked to James. James went away and thought about it, and we had a deal the next day, I think. So, so many good things come from who you know and being there at the right moment. I'm sure you probably done a better job than I did, just because you're such a long-time fan and have followed him at every step. But I'm the one who got lucky, and I did have a wonderful time with it, and we spent a lot of good hours together in person, a lot of good hours on the phone. It's a delight for anybody who is not only a fan of his humor, but also it was a delight for me as somebody who just loves comedy, because another aspect of James's career that I don't think his fans know much about is that the comedy business, he created a lot of it. He created how comedians make a living, how they make it from merchandise. He created how they schedule their runs. He created the opportunity for them to work in theaters, not just comedy clubs and nightclubs and hotels. So many things that are a part of the landscape right now came from James Gregory figuring it out on his own, borrowing it from some really fascinating sources I can tell you about too.
And a lot of people used his template that went on to make a lot more money than he did. And that, of course, was not what was most important to him. He went and he slept in the back of his car in the dead of winter and in the dog days of summer because he had, which is very important, not a dream but a goal to be a stand-up comedian. And when he moved back in with his parents, he said, "This is going to work out, Daddy." And he bought his dad that Cadillac, but his dad was always a Ford man. And I'm quoting, I'm quoting from the book. And then when James got financially secure, he said, "You want me to buy you a Ford, Daddy?" And he said, "No, I like that Cadillac, and I'm afraid if you don't buy me another Cadillac, they'll think you're not doing good." So I thought that was.
Love that story.
I thought that was great. But I think, and I hope he wasn't mentioning me, because I may have gotten mentioned inadvertently. And I hope this wasn't me, because during our last interview, I asked him, I said, "Well, what can we, just general questioning, what can we expect when you come to the Lincoln Theater in Marion, which fills about 8,000 people. James has performed to audiences larger than the entire population of my town. Marion's the next town about 25 miles up, probably 9 or 10,000 in Marion. He played 2 sold-out shows every February, and I saw him there twice. He played 2 sold-out shows I think it's at 5 or 700 seater, one or the other, to the Lincoln Theater in Marion. And the last time I saw him, February 2023, and he was very sick at that time. You could tell it. He didn't talk about it, but you could tell he was not well. And spoke with him after the show. But I'm digressing as usual. I asked him the question when we were doing the interview. So, what can we expect? Have you got some new material for us? Are you just doing some greatest hits, or what? And he said, "Now, Zach, if you were interviewing Bruce Springsteen or Kenny Chesney, would you ask them that question?" And knowing me, I said, "Yeah, James, I probably would." But he didn't. He thought that was a very basic question, and he quoted that in his book because he said it was a commonly asked question, and he quoted it. He said a reporter from North Carolina. So if he was talking about me, he got the state wrong. So I said, "Well, that's good. If he was talking about me, nobody will know that I was the one that asked him the question he thought was stupid." But
No, I can tell you that you can rest easy. That was not about you. That absolutely was about somebody from North Carolina. To his credit, he wasn't going to tell me the name because he didn't want it to accidentally end up in there.
Right.
But you could take some comfort from the fact that, like you said, this is a question. I mean, you're a good reporter. And I read the piece you wrote here. I've read this. It's very, very good. Everybody should see that if they hadn't seen it already. It just captures him so well. And Lenny Sussman, his manager, said so many nice things about this as well. Said it to me. He said, "Lenny said it to me as soon as you said it to him."
Right.
It just really covers it. But no, this is a question that he gets asked pretty often. And I got to tell you, he'll be a little prickly about it, but he's just making a point.
Sure.
He's just making a point, and any good reporter would ask that question. So I don't think you got anything to worry about, my friend.
Well, he answered the question and was very kind, and I love that he picked at me. But something that I do want to mention in the book here is that we get into the spiritual side of James Gregory. And I said in the piece, I get more from I am more spiritually moved by a James Gregory comedy show at times than I would be by a church service because of the way he spoke. And he did speak to churches because some of the things he said, for instance, the routine about the dad not wanting to get up and answer the phone, And maybe the reason he didn't do that is because everything he needed was already right in front of him. That didn't get a laugh. The whole audience broke out in spontaneous applause at that response, because what he is telling you is about life, and just what's important about life, and the way he speaks in this book is very, very moving. And when he speaks of his father, and that he smelled, when he had come out of a coma that he'd been in for 32 days, he wrote on that board that they gave him because he had a trach in, "Where's Daddy?" And his sister thought he was confused, and he said, "Oh, Daddy couldn't make it." But he said, "No, I know my daddy was here because I could smell that cigar smoke that only he smelled." Well, my wife has had those near-death experiences, and she has had the smells and seen the sights and things that are dismissed by other people who are not open to such things. And the fact that he was that open to it and spoke about it led me to my own story. Because, again, as you said, you've read the piece and you were very kind to say what you said about it, but I'm a very carnivorous person, so I'm very relatable to the joke that he makes about vegetarians. And I'm in total agreement. I would die if I had to be a vegetarian. So he said, I opened the refrigerator to get me something to drink, and I noticed a jar of mustard, and I said, what would this vegetarian be doing with a jar of mustard? And then he said, I happened to notice behind the carton of almond milk was a pack of weenies. And he just gave that look that only James could do. So my wife was cleaning out the refrigerator one day, and she has a carton of almond milk. Note, that's hers and not mine. And she said, I moved that carton of almond milk, and I saw your pack of Oscar Mayer hot dogs back there. And she said, I knew that could only be James.
Oh, yes.
So,
oh, yes.
Of all the people in the world that he could be saying hello to, he was giving me a wink from heaven. And I know that was him. And nobody can take that away from me either, because I know that was him.
I love it. I love it. I think the important thing to know about people who want to know, as you know firsthand,
exactly.
Know about James, want to know about the spiritual and what informed him, is that James believed that this is the number one rule. You got to be sure that nobody has to take care of you.
Yeah.
He said, if you take care of yourself, then you can worry about taking care of everybody around you. But if you don't take care of yourself, somebody's going to have to take care of you. So do that first. And it all flows from that. He didn't expect anything from anybody. He didn't ask anybody for favors. He did the hard work himself. You know, there's a thing in the book where we talk about, James talks about the comedians that he has some hard things to say about those comedians that say, well, this is a party and I only work for an hour a day. He said, you get up, you work, whether that's writing or reviewing your material or whether that's making phone calls or sending out merchandise. James would get up in the morning 2 hours before he'd do things like those radio shows in the morning. He got up and prepared for those things. He treated this like anybody with a job would treat a far more ordinary job. And that's not only the key to his success, it's the key to his peace.
But I loved what he said about the civil rights movement, because he grew up in a very interracial neighborhood, and race was never an issue for him. And I just thought that was lovely. Can you mention a little bit of that?
Well, sure. I'll just characterize it here.
Yeah.
He said that again, you come back to James understood that there have been people who have had to suffer. That includes in the United States, black people haven't always been treated very well, and a lot of other minorities haven't been treated very well. He understands that, and he saw it up close. But he also saw what kind of decency is possible from people who simply say, look, let's just love other people because they're people and for no other reason. And he talks about his father saying how silly it is to have different buses, take black kids to one school and white kids to another. Just no sense in it. So when you talk about James's politics, you can certainly characterize it one way or the other, but it all flows from a couple of big ideas. One is that everybody deserves some love and some respect. That's one of them. And the other thing is, the only way you're going to make it better is by acting on it yourself. Don't wait for the government to do something or force somebody else to come along. If you take care of your corner of the world, your corner of the world is going to be all right. If everybody does that, the whole thing will be okay. I believe that's a fair statement about how James felt about race and politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think nobody's more sensitive to the problems that people will feel than James was. James was very sympathetic to that, and it comes out in the kinds of stories that he told, and the kind of life that he lived. Just a good man in so many ways.
Absolutely, about every level you can think of. Now, there were a couple things that surprised me in the book, because James is very down to earth, very no frills kind of person. It surprised me, and I'm sure this was just a personal choice on the fact of James Gregory, but it surprised me that he had plastic surgery.
Well, I'll tell you, I wouldn't make too much out of that.
Right.
Just because, he's a man who is a performer.
Yeah.
And he's in the public eye. He's on that stage, and so when you mention, did he do it for himself? I think there's a case to be made that there's a little bit of vanity in all of us, and he wanted to look good, but he also knew that fans deserve the best from you. And if that's something that he could improve by having some of these little procedures, and these weren't major procedures,
right.
I think he was doing it as much for professional reasons as anything else. And obviously, he didn't make some big secret out of it. So,
right.
So I think it's just another aspect of a guy who kind of killed two birds with one stone, you might say.
Right.
He could look a little better for himself, and he could look a little better for the audience and carry that look out. Because his look changed very much as he got older and had his heart problems. And he wanted people to think about the material, not about some distraction, about worrying about James.
Right.
So you make a good point once again.
Right. And there was no other thing, and again, this is just nosy question. Just because he never mentioned in the book having any kind of romances or anything like that, and never married or had children. Did he mention that to you at all? Or if he did, he probably would want to keep that.
He didn't really. It's funny. There were so many things I remember we wanted to talk about. We just didn't have time to get there.
Right.
We wanted to do. We really wanted to get this book out as soon as we could. And as you may know, I may have mentioned this to you in some of our correspondence. Mm-hmm. People should know. We've actually traded a few messages here. That he died 3 days after the captions were written for the book. He and Lenny sat down and worked on the captions for the photos in the book, and he died 3 days after. So many things we wanted to talk about a little bit. Some things we just didn't have enough to fill it out with. But there were a lot of topics that we didn't get to. And so what we did was we kind of talked, the three of us, Lenny and James and I. So what is it that the fans most want to know? And so we obviously, he wants to know the stories or they want to know the stories about him growing up. They want to know about his career. He wanted to talk about the nature of the business of comedy, and he wanted them to know about the source. And this is the last thing we worked on together. Right. The source of these jokes. And if you go into the book, there are some QR codes there you can photograph with your phone, and it'll take you to the video where you can hear the comedy bit. And then you can read the story of where it came from.
Absolutely.
So I'll tell you, we could have written a whole other book with stuff. I talk to comedians, you know what they say? They say, how come you didn't put the story in that he tells the comedians? I mean, all the comedian stories would have been wonderful too.
Right.
And we could have written a lot more. So you're just scratching the surface, man.
Absolutely. But you did an absolute beautiful piece with what you've done. And I'd like to just close with this last story. You know, when he was coming up in the 80s, it was Willy Wonka's golden ticket to get on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. It's never been like that before or since. James was invited. The producer's producer asked him to speed up his talk or to alter it in some way, which he did at first. And then he said, call me back in 6 months. And James quickly knew that he was getting passed off. And finally he said, you know what? I don't need this. I don't need to be on the Tonight Show. I don't need to sacrifice what I am and my material for the Tonight Show.
Well, let me tell you, I want everybody to understand, he wanted it. He did want to be on the Tonight Show. That is for sure a true thing.
Right.
But not at the price that they were going to extract from it.
Right.
They didn't seem to understand or care about maybe the way that he performed. And his stuff, his material is wound up in the way it's delivered. And I think they were just I think they were put off by the Southern thing, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think that this was an excuse that Macaulay came up with.
Right.
I really do. And James would have loved to have been on the Tonight Show, but he had to make a choice. He could go on there, do it their way, maybe if they eventually have him, and it wouldn't help him. He'd just look kind of foolish, he thought. Yeah. Or he could say, I'm just going to carve my own way. And that's what he chose to do. So I think that's the takeaway from the Tonight Show. As you said, he said he's going to make it's not that he didn't want it. It's that he didn't want it on their terms. And their terms weren't going to give him anything in the long run.
But that is what made James Gregory, that is what endeared him to the people who loved him so much.
Yep.
Was the fact that he was just a good old Southern boy, just like you and just like me, and he wasn't going to change that. He didn't want to be as rich as Jeff Foxworthy or Jerry Seinfeld. Maybe he did at one point, but he was not going to do that in order to sacrifice who he was. And that's why he became the funniest man in America without it.
Well, it's true, and let me just say, because he's not here to say it, and I think he wants you to know, but he wouldn't want to have to say it. Don't ever mistake his humility and his care with leaving money on the table. James did very well, so we should all be grateful that he was compensated so well for what he did. He saved his money. He was generous in ways that I'm not going to share. But he was absolutely a generous, giving philanthropist. There are places that exist in the South, facilities, that's as specific as I'll be, that exist in Georgia, that exist because James Gregory wrote a check. He was a very generous man. He did very well on money, so I'm happy for him. What a life he lived.
I thank you so much for this conversation. I'm sure that it has been way more beneficial for me than it has you, but it's always great to talk about our friend James Gregory, and thank you for what you've done. Thank you for what you've done for him.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
All right, it's my honor. Thank you.